Hello, my name is Vil or Taven. We've got a lot to look at in terms of Final Fantasy 16 content that has just hit in the last couple days thanks to the PlayStation State of Play, as well as the official Final Fantasy 16 Twitter account, as well as their website, which I also have taken a couple screenshots from, and we're going to go over that information today. I just want to get right into it. So one of the first things we've got is actually the development staff of Final Fantasy 16. And this is absolutely a huge deal because I have never seen a gaming company go through and introduce each of their main development staff members, as well as their past titles and accomplishments. That's one of my favorite things so far that 16 is doing, was being upfront about the backgrounds of the people working on their games, so that you can understand where some of their development choices might come from. For example, the producer Naoki Yoshida is actually from the Final Fantasy XIV community, as well as having worked on 2 Dragon Quest games. Now, Dragon Quest is one of the biggest RPGs, especially in Japan, and so I think that's a boatload of experience to come in with, along with the long-running Final Fantasy XIV, which has seen its share of struggles and successes. So I definitely think Yoshida brings a lot to the table in experience that is greatly going to help 16 be a amazing mainline entry in the series. Along with that, the main director, past titles that the main director of Final Fantasy 16 has worked on include Final Fantasy V, which was something of a dark horse in the franchise for a lot of people. Not as many people liked 5 as they would 4 and 6 respectively. Along with that, Saga Frontier, which I have heard of but I don't have too much experience with, and The Last Remnant. I did hear good things about both games, but I do not know 100% what that's going to bring to the table from the main director. The creative director and original screenplay writer, they did work on Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV has a lot of creative decisions that I think really help it to be one of the best MMOs on the market right now and consistently stay in the top of the Steam player counts. As well as that, working on Final Fantasy XII, very much a game that I think is vastly underrated in the Final Fantasy sphere. I think as a JRPG as a whole, people either love 12 or they hate it. And it also depends on what version they played. Me personally, I prefer the original. A lot of people prefer Zodiac Age or the International Zodiac Job System. Either way, I think that brings a lot to the table. As well as having worked on The Last Remnant, we're going to see some synergy between the creative director and the main director that maybe some other games in the series might not have had, especially games with people that come from completely different backgrounds. We're going to see a bit more synergy than we might have seen with previous titles, which has probably sped up development a load. It has probably helped so much. The localization director actually worked on both Final Fantasy MMOs as well as Dirge of Cerberus, which is a really weird title because not a lot of people know that Dirge of Cerberus exists, and so I think that's something really interesting with that. As well, that might actually be the... Oh, that makes sense, localization director. I was going to say that might be the only American person on this team, which is interesting. Square Enix is very hands-on with their projects. A lot of them never leave development from Japan. They're all developed entirely in Japan until it comes time to the localization. Until it's time to bring the game to other countries, other areas like Europe, Australia, New Zealand, as well as other parts of Asia, etc. Usually it's mostly Japanese people working on the game, and then it is shipped to other places and made into those other languages and translated to the best of their ability, which has actually led to a lot of memes, a lot of jokes in the community about the translations and about the localizations. But that's for a different day. Our art director actually comes from 14 as well as 12 and Tactics. Now, Tactics is an odd one because Tactics is one of the few grid-based games in the series, one of the few tactical RPGs. So it's interesting that the art director from that also worked on 12, for one, also worked on 14, even stranger, and is now working on 16. Seems like they're going for every even numbered after 10. But we will see exactly what they bring to the table. So far, the game looks phenomenal. All of the creatures that we've seen so far, all the characters look absolutely amazing. So we will see where that leads us to. The combat director, I think, is one of the most important ones, and this is huge. Ryota Suzuki actually worked on Devil May Cry 5, a huge one, a massive success for action games, a massive success for hack and slash, massive success for the Devil May Cry franchise as a whole, and really brought it back into the mainstream after 4 was a little bit less than expected for a lot of people. So that is amazing to see that combat director. That may be why the combat seems a little bit flashier than it did before. And also maybe why we're seeing less party members in these games. That could be an overarching Square Enix decision to focus more on individual characters and their stories, as opposed to vast amounts of characters where people end up not caring about them as well. Dragon's Dogma, heard a lot of good things about that. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is insane, because as far as I'm aware, 2 and 3 are the best in the Marvel combat series. So that's actually really good. We're probably going to see combat that's a lot more balanced than we have in previous titles, like 15 in the cases of the Ring of the Lucy, in the case of the Armiger. We just saw absolutely like overpowered insaneness. This might actually be a drawback to older titles where things might have been a little bit less easy to bulldoze through. So we might actually be seeing a very heavy focus on combat balance, which would be something a little bit new for the Final Fantasy franchise, as with most JRPGs, you can grind up and you can pretty much take on anything. The only thing that's really a problem is super bosses. With a combat director coming from other games that are more focused on the action side of things, we might see a bit more focus on the balance aspect from beginning to end, especially if they're overseeing all of the combat. So that is absolutely amazing and a huge plus. Along with that, our character designer is coming off of Final Fantasy X, 11, and 14. So after 10, obviously immediately moved to the MMO side of things. But along with that comes 10, which is one of the more mainstream entries in the series. One of the few to receive an expanded set of games alongside it. I think it shares that distinction with 7 and 4, as far as I'm aware, and 13, of course, of games that expand the main game in the series. So that is actually very interesting, as Final Fantasy X is widely revered for its character choices, especially its villains, like Seymour, Jacked, even the Maesters of Yevon. Some absolutely amazing characters. I am less familiar with 11 and 14, but I have heard nothing but good about 14 after its re-release, and I think 11 still has a pretty staunch player base to this date. So that's absolutely amazing. Rounding out the main development staff that we've been given is actually the composer that worked on Final Fantasy XIV, which is amazing. I've heard a lot of music from that game. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I think that's definitely going to really immerse us in the game, immerse us in the universe of Final Fantasy XVI, and really get us to feel something for these characters. A proper composer can make or break some moments in a game, so it's awesome to see somebody with this much experience. As well, they also worked on the Nanoshi No game series. I'm not familiar with that one at all. I actually have not heard of it before reading that. But Mario Hoops 3-on-3, I mean, you can't go wrong with Mario Hoops. Along with the development staff, we also did receive a message from the producer, Naoki Yoshida, who has decided to grace us with a message in regards to the game. Now, in this message, he does talk about how the game wasn't really too deep with what we saw in the Awakening trailer, in the previous trailer. Which is true. We did see a minute amount of combat. We saw a couple of cutscenes, I think. As well as that, we've seen a little bit of the summons, which seem to be a very big deal in this game. Some games completely disregard summons. They don't really talk about them much at all. 7, 9, somewhat, but not as much. Some games focus more on the summons, such as 6. Somewhat focuses on it in regards to the main character, at least. 8, they're a very central part of the story. 10, they're a very central part of the story. 12, not so much at all. But throughout the games, there is either a super heavy focus on the summons, or they're barely mentioned at all. So this is one of the very focused on the summon games, which has had mixed results in the past, to say the least. It also shows more gameplay, more high-octane battles, as well as being right into the action seems to be something that they're focusing on, more of a cinematic experience, while also focusing on the gameplay of the cinematic experience. Think something along the lines of almost like playing an action movie, as a video game. From the sounds of it, that's what we've got. They keep mentioning the power of the PlayStation 5. And that's what gets me is part of the first trailer says that Final Fantasy 16 will be a limited release on the PlayStation 5, followed by later dates for other platforms, probably the Xbox and PC. I really doubt we're getting a Switch port here, and I don't think anybody can blame them. However, along with this, it also brings up that in the first trailer, it was actually recorded on a PC, and it was emulating the power of the PlayStation 5. So really, what we saw was a PC version, which makes me think that maybe a PC version isn't that far off from the summer 2023 release on PlayStation 5. We may actually see a PC release within a couple of months after, maybe even holiday 2023, fall 2023. I really doubt it, knowing Sony, but we will see. Along with that, we did actually get a message from the director as well on the Final Fantasy 16 Twitter, who opens up with an apology for making us wait so long, because I think it's been around 6 months now since their last message, which actually was an update telling us that they wouldn't have any information until spring 2022, and here we are with that information. He does talk about how the game is fully playable from start to finish, although optimization still needs to be hit. That is a very big thing in games, is a game can be playable from start to back, but bugs can absolutely destroy them. We've seen that with Final Fantasy XIV, we've seen that with Cyberpunk 2077, and I think that's something that a lot of developers are focusing on now, especially coming out of a work from home period and a period where maybe the synergy just wasn't there working from home on Zoom calls. So now with people getting more in-depth into their development cycles, now we're going to be seeing more of the bug fixes. We're going to see a lot more trailers for games coming soon, I believe, at the very least. And we're going to see a lot more solid dates as people move back towards the best version of normal we can get while keeping people safe. So I think that is a very huge thing, and I'm glad that they brought it up, that they're optimizing. I am very excited for the fact that it is fully playable already. It means we could actually start seeing demos, possibly early next year. And that would be absolutely amazing. Maybe a closed beta, maybe if they have a multiplayer function similar to 14, based on how many people from the MMO are actually working on this. Maybe we'll see some kind of multiplayer feature come. Maybe we'll get a beta for it, similar to Elden Ring's open tech test, similar to a lot of the other betas we've seen recently with games like Overwatch 2. Maybe we'll see a lot more of that, and we'll see a lot more trailers, as well as seeing some more in-depth dives into gameplay. I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. I wanted to talk about the director and producer, as well as what we've seen so far from the team and who is going to be on the team working on 16, who have been developing it for who knows how long. I'm sure this has been in development for a very long time. If you don't know, Square typically works on games in a staggered release schedule. It's not nearly as bad as it was in the late 90s. We actually saw the back-to-back release of Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, and Final Fantasy XI within 3 years of each other. And I don't think this is anything close to that. I think this game has probably been in the works since around the time Final Fantasy 15 probably launched. My guess would be that they took a bit of a skeleton crew and had them finish the DLC and the other updates for the game, and then they focused a lot of their heavy hitters on Final Fantasy 16. So this game has probably been in development for 6 or 7 years now, would be my guess. Possibly even less, but honestly, a game like this, from the size and the way that they talk about it, has probably been in the works for a really, really long time. I would not be shocked at all if this has been in development since even 2015, 2016, even just the story, even just the character design, any of it. So we're going to see a lot of good things out of Final Fantasy 16. I'm very confident, and these updates do nothing but bring confidence to the table, let us know where they're at, and the transparency is something that a lot of game studios don't get, and I think Square really has nailed it with updating people on what's going on. The only other studio I think on their level of communication is probably Bungie. That's a very huge update. That is very amazing. I will be uploading more Final Fantasy content coming up. I'm actually going to be working on a few videos in regards to 16, as well as continuing my Final Fantasy X playthrough over on my Twitch channel. You can check that out in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this update and enjoyed me rambling on about it for a minute, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you.